Willow Street had always been the kind of place people went to when they wanted to escape noise. It wasn't a tourist area, and it wasn't a busy market. It was simply a peaceful stretch of old buildings, small cafes, and quietly aging shops that seemed untouched by time. Every morning, the shop owners opened their doors around the same hour, nodding politely to each other as they swept their front steps or arranged their window displays. People who walked by often said the street felt calming, as if it moved at its own slow pace while the rest of the world rushed around it. Among these old shops stood Bennett's Books, a narrow but charming little bookstore with a faded green sign and flower pots arranged neatly around the entrance. The windows were always cleaned so well that the reflection of the street looked almost like a painting. The scent inside was unforgettable, a mix of old paper, polished wood, and fresh coffee that came from a small machine behind the counter. Locals said the bookstore felt more like home than an actual shop, and many people visited it simply to sit, read, or breathe in its quiet atmosphere. The owner, Margaret Bennett, had spent more than 30 years running the store. At 63, she still moved with careful energy, like someone who loved her routine so much she didn't want to waste a single moment. Her silver hair was always tied neatly behind her head, and her eyes had a soft shine that made everyone feel welcome. Those who knew her described her as patient, warm, and gently humorous. Some even said she had a special gift for recommending the perfect book to anyone who walked in. She lived in a modest apartment right above the shop, and the bookstore was truly the center of her life. Her days rarely changed. Every morning she watered the flowers outside the door, sometimes talking to them quietly as if they were companions. Then she unlocked the shop, swept the floor, adjusted the displays, and brewed her small pot of coffee. By the time the first customers arrived, the shop looked peaceful and ready for another day. Margaret enjoyed the stillness that came before the doorbell chimed. It made her feel grounded, like the world was giving her a moment to breathe before life resumed its usual rhythm. But everything changed on one rainy Thursday evening. The kind of rain that fell that night wasn't heavy or loud. It was cold, steady, and oddly quiet, as if the sky knew something tragic was about to happen. People hurried along the street with umbrellas pressed low over their heads, rushing to get indoors before the storm worsened. Bennett's Books, however, remained brightly lit, its warm glow spilling onto the wet pavement. Normally, Margaret closed the store by 6, but that evening, the lights remained on long past the usual time. A delivery boy named Liam noticed the lights while riding his bike home. He passed the store daily and often saw Margaret reading by the counter. When he glanced inside that night, he slowed down. Something felt wrong. The shop was still open, but there was no movement inside. He considered knocking on the door but convinced himself Margaret had simply forgotten the lights. The rain was getting worse, and he wanted to get home quickly. He rode away, unaware that this small moment of hesitation would haunt him for months. The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, Mrs. Jennings, one of the bookstore's regular customers, walked toward the shop with her umbrella. She visited almost every day to buy crossword booklets and chat with Margaret. She noticed immediately that something was off. The door was unlocked, which Margaret never allowed before she was fully ready. The flower pots were still wet from the rain, untouched since the previous day. And worst of all, the lights inside were still on. Mrs. Jennings pushed the door gently. The bell chimed, echoing loudly in the silent bookstore. At first, she thought Margaret might be in the back room organizing stock. She called out her name softly, then again louder. No answer. As she took a step forward, her foot brushed against something on the floor. When she looked down, she saw books scattered across the entrance area, some lying face down, others open as if someone had torn through the shelves in a hurry. A chill ran down her spine. She walked around the counter, and the sight she discovered made her scream. Margaret Bennett lay on the floor, motionless, her glasses broken beside her, one lens cracked. A small trail of dried blood traced across the wooden floorboards. She looked peaceful, almost like she had simply fallen asleep mid-task, but the unnatural angle of her arm and the shock frozen on her face made it clear something terrible had taken place. Mrs. Jennings dropped her umbrella and stumbled backward, rushing outside to call the police. Within minutes, the peaceful street transformed into a crime scene. Police cars arrived one after another, their flashing lights reflecting off the still wet pavement. Yellow tape was stretched across the entrance, and officers guided curious onlookers away. The calm of Willow Street was replaced by murmurs, questions, and the quiet panic of a neighborhood that had never experienced something so violent. Detective Aaron Cole arrived shortly afterward. He was known for his calm approach and sharp observational skills. In his mid-40s, with carefully kept facial hair and a collected presence, he had solved some of the city's most puzzling cases. But something about the bookstore's atmosphere unsettled him. The moment he stepped inside, he sensed a story unfolding beneath the surface, a story hidden between bookshelves and shadows. Cole carefully examined the scene. There were no signs of forced entry. The front door lock was undamaged, and the windows were closed from the inside. The cash register was untouched, still full. Expensive first editions remained neatly in place. Nothing valuable appeared to be missing. If it had been a robbery, it was the strangest one he had ever seen. But then he saw it. Beside Margaret's hand lay a single torn page from an old book. The paper looked aged, yellowed around the edges, and slightly brittle. It didn't match any of the books lying around the store. When Cole picked it up with gloved fingers, he noticed faint handwriting in the margin, not printed text. A note someone had scribbled long ago. Why was it placed there? Was it dropped during a struggle? Or had the killer left it intentionally, almost like a message? Cole felt a chill run through him as he studied the page. Something about it didn't belong, not to the store, not to the scene, not to Margaret's careful way of keeping her shop. It was too deliberate, too out of place, as though it had been chosen. An officer approached him and handed him Margaret's phone, which had been found behind the register. Her last call was the previous evening at 6:27 p.m., just minutes before the estimated time of death. The call had lasted less than a minute. No voicemail. No explanation. Cole stepped back and looked around the bookstore from a wider perspective. Shelves stood neatly, untouched except for the small area near the entrance where the books had been knocked over. The reading lounge seemed undisturbed, chairs still arranged as Margaret preferred. The coffee machine had cooled but still sat half full, suggesting she had made herself a cup earlier that evening. Nothing pointed to a struggle beyond the scattered books. The rain outside continued to drizzle lightly, tapping against the windows as if echoing the tension inside the store. Cole walked slowly toward the back of the shop, examining every corner, every shelf, every detail that might tell him what happened. A calm place like this shouldn't hold secrets. But somehow, it felt like the walls themselves were whispering clues. He took a deep breath and turned back toward Margaret's still form. Her gentle face, once full of warmth, now seemed to carry a silent plea. Someone had ended her life inside the place she loved most. And for what? A page. A book. A secret she may have uncovered? Cole didn't know the answer yet, but he felt it deep in his instincts. This wasn't a simple killing. This wasn't random. Someone had come here with purpose. Someone who knew Margaret. Someone who understood the bookstore. He walked outside where the neighbors had gathered anxiously. Many were crying softly or whispering theories to one another. To them, Margaret had been a symbol of comfort, a familiar part of daily life. Losing her felt personal. Cole scanned the faces. People who were grieving, shocked, confused. But maybe among them was someone who knew more. Someone who had been watching. Someone who understood exactly what had happened but pretended not to. As officers continued their work, Cole spoke quietly to himself. This isn't the end. This is only the beginning. Because the torn page lying beside Margaret Bennett's hand was not just a clue. It was a warning. A message from someone who had planned this carefully. A sign that whatever had started in Bennett's books had only just begun. Detective Aaron Cole arrived early the next morning, determined to begin his investigation with a clear mind. Willow Street was unusually quiet, almost as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. The previous night's rain had washed the pavement clean, leaving behind a faint earthy smell. But the atmosphere around Bennett's books felt heavier, weighed down by grief and confusion. Cole pushed open the bookstore door, hearing the familiar bell that had welcomed customers for decades. Now the sound felt strange, hollow, almost out of place in such a somber setting. The shop was still a crime scene, sealed with tape, but Cole had been granted early access to continue his search before the forensic team returned. He walked slowly through the space, studying every detail. Something inside him kept whispering that Margaret's death was not random. Someone had come into this peaceful store with intent. He moved toward the counter where Margaret's body had been found. The torn book page was already bagged as evidence, but the memory of how it looked on the floor lingered in his mind. It was not just a piece of paper. It felt like a clue carefully placed to be discovered. Cole was not a man who jumped to conclusions, but he trusted his intuition, and it told him that page meant something much bigger. Later that morning, he took the page to the police department's small archive room, a place filled with old filing cabinets, dust-covered records, and the smell of aging paper. He laid the page on the table under the bright white lamp. The paper was yellowed, the edges rough, as if torn from a book that had lived a long life. The text was printed in an old-fashioned style, the kind used in early 20th century crime novels. It described a scene of a mysterious stranger visiting a lonely cabin at dusk. Nothing about the content hinted at a clear message, but Cole's eyes were drawn to a faint handwritten note in the margin. It wasn't a full sentence, just a few scribbled words that looked like initials or a short message. The ink had faded, making it even harder to understand. He checked the bookstore inventory list that Margaret kept on her computer. Cole had expected to find the book title somewhere on the list, maybe hidden among rare editions or new donations. But after scrolling through the detailed catalog she maintained, he noticed something unsettling. The book the page came from wasn't listed anyway. Margaret recorded everything with precision, yet this book was absent. That meant someone either brought it into the store recently or it had been hidden somewhere Margaret didn't want people to find. Cole leaned back, rubbing his forehead. The more he thought about it, the stranger it felt. Why would Margaret have a book she didn't want recorded? And why would only one page be left behind after the murder? That question led him to plan a series of interviews, starting with the customer whose name had surfaced most often the day before, Eleanor Marsh. Nearly everyone had mentioned her without hesitation. Regular visitor, close friend of Margaret, a young woman who spent hours in the store reading and talking about classic crime novels. Eleanor stood out because she wasn't just another customer. She was part of the bookstore's daily rhythm. When Eleanor arrived at the station, she looked shaken. Her light brown hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and her eyes were red from crying. She held her bag tightly against her chest, almost as if she feared someone might take it away. Detective Cole greeted her gently, guiding her into a quiet interview room. She sat at the table, staring at her hands. "Eleanor," Cole said in a calm voice, "I understand this is difficult. I want to ask you some questions about Margaret. We're trying to figure out what happened." Eleanor nodded, swallowing hard. "I still can't believe it. She was one of the kindest people I knew." "People said you were close to her," Cole continued. "You visited the store every day." She nodded again. "I liked talking to her. She never judged me or rushed me. She always asked what I was reading, always listened. I didn't have many friends here, so the bookstore became my safe place." Cole took the torn page from a folder and placed it gently on the table. Eleanor stared at it with a mixture of confusion and fear. "Do you recognize this?" he asked. There was a pause so long that Cole thought she might refuse to answer. Her chest rose and fell as she breathed deeply, gathering the courage to speak. "No," she finally whispered. "I've never seen this before." She reached out slightly but stopped herself from touching the plastic evidence bag. "But Margaret mentioned something strange a few days ago." Cole's interest sharpened. "What did she say?" "She told me someone had dropped off a book. A donation. She said it looked old, rare. She didn't know who left it. It just appeared on the counter one morning. She thought it might be valuable." Cole leaned forward. "Did she show it to you?" Eleanor shook her head. "No. She said she hadn't had time to examine it fully." "But," her voice trailed off. "But what?" Cole asked gently. She seemed nervous. Margaret wasn't someone who got scared easily, but when she talked about the book, she looked unsettled. That word stuck with Cole. He let Eleanor leave after the interview, but her final statement echoed in his head. Unsettled. Margaret Bennett, a woman who lived a peaceful life surrounded by books, had been frightened by something found inside her own shop. Cole returned to the bookstore later that afternoon, determined to search for any sign of this mysterious donation. The store was quiet, cold, and still. Without Margaret's presence, it felt empty in a way that was hard to describe. He walked through the aisles again, scanning each shelf carefully. Nothing looked out of place except for a small gap on the top shelf near the back of the shop. The dust around the space made it clear that a book had recently been there. Cole climbed onto a small wooden stool and inspected the gap more closely. Wedged deep inside the space was something small and rectangular. He pulled it out carefully. It was a tiny piece of paper, no bigger than a thumb, folded over once. He opened it slowly. The message was handwritten in neat, elegant script. It read, "Chapter 2 is always the turning point." Cole stared at the note, trying to understand its meaning. Someone had placed it there intentionally, hiding it where only a careful search would uncover it. It almost felt like the killer was guiding him, pushing him toward something. The message suggested knowledge of storytelling, perhaps even a sense of dark humor. Whoever wrote it knew what they were doing. As he held the note, he felt the atmosphere of the store change subtly. The silence pressed in closer, almost as if the shop itself was waiting for him to make the next move. Cole stood there for a long moment, thinking deeply. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or anger. It was planned. A choreographed scene. The torn page, the missing book, the hidden note, everything pointed to someone who enjoyed creating mysteries. Cole decided he needed to follow the trail step by step. He searched the office next, hoping to find records of recent book donations. Margaret kept almost everything in tidy files, labeled and ordered. But when he opened the donation drawer, he found it empty. No papers. No signatures. Nothing. As if someone had removed all evidence of a recent donation. Cole checked the trash bin beside the desk. At the bottom was a crumpled piece of paper. He unfolded it and found what looked like a torn-out inventory sheet. It listed several titles, but one line had been scribbled over in dark ink. The ink was so thick it was impossible to read the original words. The more Cole examined it, the more convinced he became that someone had purposely tried to erase mentions of the mysterious book. Before leaving, Cole locked the store again and stood outside under the fading evening sky. The street was quiet, the wind brushing softly against the closed shop windows. A strange thought crossed his mind. It felt as if the killer wasn't hiding from him. Instead, the killer wanted to be found, on their own terms, following their own rules. The torn book page was not an accident. The hidden note was not a coincidence. Margaret's fear was not imaginary. There was a story buried inside this bookstore, a story that someone wanted him to uncover piece by piece. And the message left for him made one thing clear. The story had only reached its turning point. Detective Aaron Cole had always believed that crime scenes carried memories. A place where something terrible happened never fully returned to normal. The air held onto fear, confusion, and the final emotions of the victim. That belief felt stronger than ever as he stepped into Bennett's Books for the third day in a row. The familiar bell above the door chimed, but instead of sounding welcoming, it echoed like a hesitant warning. The store smelled the same: paper, wood, faint coffee. Yet something beneath that scent felt heavy, almost as if the place itself understood it had lost its keeper. Cole stood in the narrow aisle near the entrance, feeling the silence wrap around him. He had returned that morning to search for the missing book again. Something inside him insisted he had overlooked a crucial clue the first time. The mysterious note, the torn page, and the erased inventory record all pointed toward a book someone did not want found easily. As he walked deeper into the store, the wooden floors creaked, each step sounding louder than he expected. A strange tension lingered in the air, making him pause now and then as if expecting someone to appear between the shelves. He reached the back of the store, where the older books were kept. This section had always felt different from the rest. Even when Margaret was alive, the shelves here gave off a colder, more forgotten feeling. The books were older, their spines cracked, their pages tinged yellow. They had been donated by people cleaning out attics, estates, or personal collections. Margaret often said this part of the shop felt like a small graveyard of stories waiting to be revived. Cole scanned the titles slowly. His eyes drifted over dusty novels, historical records, faded encyclopedias, and collections of forgotten poetry. None of them seemed unusual. Yet he couldn't shake the sense that someone had hidden the missing book carefully, knowing it would blend in with its surroundings. He crouched down to examine the lower shelves, brushing his fingers lightly along the edges, searching for anything out of place. Just as he was about to stand up, he felt a slight shift in the shelf beneath his hand, as though one section had been moved recently. He leaned closer. The dust pattern was uneven. A thin rectangle of cleaner would suggest that a book had been pulled out or pushed inward not too long ago. Cole pressed his fingers against the back of the shelf. It felt solid, but when he pushed harder, a faint clicking sound emerged. He froze. He pushed again, and this time the shelf shifted slightly backward with a soft scraping noise, revealing a small hollow space behind it. Inside was a thin, leather-bound book wrapped in a piece of cloth. Cole's heartbeat quickened as he reached in carefully and pulled it out. The leather cover was worn, cracked along the edges, and the title was printed in faded gold lettering. The Spine of Shadows. Cole opened it gently. The pages were fragile, with the same aged appearance as the torn page left beside Margaret's body. He flipped through the first few pages. Most of it appeared to be a mystery novel written decades ago, but what caught his attention were the handwritten notes scribbled in the margins. They were in the same handwriting as the note he found hidden behind the shelf. Short comments, initials, occasional warnings. Some notes circled certain lines in the story, making them stand out. The deeper he went, the more he realized this was not a normal book. Inserted between two chapters was something more unsettling, a folded newspaper clipping. He opened it, and his breath caught. It was an article from 22 years earlier, describing the murder of a bookstore owner in another town. A small photo showed a middle-aged man lying behind a counter, surrounded by fallen books. The headline mentioned the lack of forced entry, the missing clue, and the suspicion that the killer had left some kind of message at the scene. Cole's hands tightened around the paper. The similarities between the old case and Margaret's death were unmistakable. He folded the clipping again and placed it inside the book. Something sharp scratched his finger as he turned another page. Tucked between the final chapters was a small metal bookmark shaped like a feather. It looked harmless at first, but as Cole examined it closely, he noticed something alarming. The tip was stained a faint reddish brown, almost as though it had been dipped in blood long ago. He held it in the light and confirmed the stain was old but very real. His stomach tightened as he thought back to Margaret's fearful expression described by Eleanor. She must have discovered something inside the book that scared her. But what exactly had frightened her? Was it the hidden clipping, the stained bookmark, the handwritten notes, or was there something else he had not yet seen? He turned the last page and discovered a small envelope glued to the inside back cover. His pulse quickened as he opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with a short handwritten message in the same elegant script as the earlier note. When the final chapter begins, the truth reveals itself. Cole stared at the message, feeling a chill run down his spine. Someone was playing a dangerous game. A game designed with chapters, clues, and symbolism. Someone who knew Margaret well enough to understand she would find the book. Someone who knew Cole would eventually find it too. His instinct screamed that this killer enjoyed the process more than the outcome. The clues were not mistakes, they were intentional breadcrumbs left to control the pace of the investigation. Whoever did this wanted him to follow along, step by step, like a reader turning pages in a suspense novel. He placed the book inside an evidence bag and left the bookstore with a sense of urgency. He needed answers fast. And the first person who might know anything more about the mysterious book was Eleanor Marsh. He drove to her apartment, a small building located only a few blocks from Willow Street. Eleanor opened the door after a moment, looking even more distressed than the day before. She stepped aside to let him in, her hands trembling slightly. The living room was cluttered with books, papers, and half-finished sketches. Cole noticed crime novels stacked on the coffee table, several bookmarked halfway. He placed the evidence bag containing the Spine of Shadows on the table. Eleanor stared at it, her eyes widening. "That's the book," she whispered. "The one Margaret mentioned." Cole nodded. "It was hidden behind a shelf in the store. Did Margaret ever tell you why it unsettled her?" Eleanor swallowed hard, twisting her hands. "She didn't explain everything. But a few days before her death, she told me she found something strange in the book. I asked her what it was, and she just said, some stories shouldn't be revived. Then she changed the subject." Cole felt a heavy weight settle on his mind. Margaret had been trying to protect someone, or protect herself. He opened the book to the middle and showed Eleanor the handwritten notes. She leaned in carefully, reading the margins with growing fear. "These aren't Margaret's handwriting," she said quietly. She wrote in soft, round letters. "This is sharper, more elegant. Like someone older. Maybe someone from the past." Cole then showed her the newspaper clipping. Eleanor gasped, covering her mouth. "That's the same kind of murder," she whispered. "The same style. Do you think the killer copied it?" Cole wasn't ready to confirm anything, but the possibility had already formed in his mind. Someone had studied an old murder case, recreated it, and left behind the original storybook connected to that crime. But why bring the book to Margaret? Why her shop? He asked Eleanor if she recognized the initials written next to some notes in the margins. She stared at them for several seconds before shaking her head. No, I've never seen those before. Cole collected the book again and prepared to leave. But before he stepped out, Eleanor reached for his arm, her grip tight with Faye. "Detective," she said, her voice trembling. "Whoever did this, do you think they are watching us? Like they are waiting for the next chapter?" Cole didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, then at the dark hallway behind her. The atmosphere felt unnervingly still. "I think this is only the beginning," he finally said. "And whoever left those clues wants us to keep reading their story." When he returned to his car, he placed the book on the passenger seat and started the engine. The sun was setting behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the quiet street. As he drove away, he saw something in the rearview mirror that made him slow down. A figure stood at the end of Willow Street, tall, still, watching the bookstore. The sunlight made it impossible to see the person's face, but something told Cole this was no passerby. The figure remained motionless even as cars passed by, as if waiting patiently for the darkness to settle. Cole watched the shadowy figure for a few moments longer before driving away. He didn't know whether the person had seen him, but he knew one thing for certain. The killer wasn't just leaving clues. The killer was watching the investigation unfold, and the story they had written was far from over. Detective Hale returned to Whitfield the next morning with a strange sense of heaviness in his chest. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale orange glow over the quiet town, yet the streets already felt colder. The bookstore stood at the end of the block, the same neat little shop with its green awning and dusty front window, but now Hale knew better than to let its cozy appearance fool him. There was something hidden inside those walls, something that had been building for years, and he was determined to drag it into the light. Before entering the store, he watched from across the street as customers trickled in. Most were regulars, judging by how comfortably they moved. An elderly man was shaking hands, a woman carrying a stroller, a teenager clutching exam prep books. Hale studied their faces, wondering who among them had secrets, who might have noticed things they didn't understand at the time, or who might fear speaking up. He let them all disappear through the door before he finally crossed the road and stepped inside. The familiar bell chimed as he entered. Lydia was behind the counter, looking calmer than she had the previous day. She offered a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Hale noticed the tremble in her fingers as she straightened a stack of receipts, the slight stiffness in her movements as though forcing herself to appear normal. "You're back early," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "I never left a case unfinished," Hale replied quietly. He took a few steps past the counter and began examining the store again, but this time with a different approach. He wasn't looking for fingerprints or footprints. He was looking for tension, for things unsaid, for the strange quietness that had settled over the place. Every corner held a kind of stillness that made his skin crawl. A customer brushed past Hale, muttering an apology. Hale noticed Lydia watching the man disappear toward the history section. Her stare was oddly intense, too focused. She looked away quickly when she noticed Hale observing her. "Lydia," he said softly, "is there anything you didn't tell me yesterday?" She shook her head too quickly. "I told you everything." "You hesitated," he reminded her. "You said you knew Mark wasn't alone that night. You said something felt wrong. What did you mean by that?" She exhaled shakily and lowered her gaze. "I don't know how to explain it. It was a feeling. The lights flickering earlier that night, the back room making noises. I thought Mark was just moving things around even though he said he wasn't. I didn't want to sound paranoid." "You're not paranoid," Hale replied. "You're observant." Silence stretched between them. Then she finally said, "If I tell you something, you won't think I'm crazy. I promise I'll take you seriously." She leaned closer. "I think someone was hiding in the store before Mark died. I heard breathing. Not mine. Not Mark's. Slow breathing, like someone trying to stay quiet." Hale felt a cold ripple through him. "Where?" "In the poetry aisle," she whispered. "Near the back. I didn't check because the lights kept flickering and I got scared." Hale straightened, now fully alert. The poetry section was where Mark's body had been found. He didn't say anything to Lydia yet, but inside his mind everything had just taken a darker turn. He moved to the poetry shelves. The air felt heavy here, as if carrying traces of what had happened. He ran his fingers lightly over the spines of the books. Many were new, perfectly aligned, but a few looked slightly out of place, as if someone had pushed against them recently. A sudden thump echoed from the storage room in the back. Hale's head snapped up. Lydia jumped at the sound. "That happens sometimes," she said with forced calm. "The old shelves aren't stable." Hale wasn't convinced. He walked toward the storage room, pushing the door open slowly. Inside, long metal shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes of books and old invoices. The air smelled of dust and cardboard. Hale scanned every corner carefully, noticing how some boxes were still sealed while others had been recently opened. The floor had faint marks, suggesting something or someone had moved through here late at night. In the far corner, something caught his eye. A single book lay on the ground, its pages splayed open. He picked it up. It was a rare edition of a collection of letters from a long-dead poet. But that wasn't what bothered him. What bothered him was what lay underneath. A small piece of black fabric, torn from clothing. Hale held it gently. The edges were frayed, the tear recent. He stepped back into the main shop and showed it to Lydia. Her face lost all color. "That's not from Mark," she whispered. "He never wore black." "Then it must be from the person who was here," Hale replied. Her voice trembled. "Detective, do you think the killer was hiding in the store before Mark even arrived that night?" "Yes," Hale said slowly. "And I think they might have been watching both of you." Lydia shuddered. Hale knew he couldn't tell her the rest of what he suspected. Not yet. He believed the killer had been stalking the store for days, maybe weeks, learning the routines, waiting for the perfect moment. But why? What connection did they have to this place? Just then, the doorbell chimed again. A tall man entered the store, carrying a plain brown envelope. He wore a long coat and glasses, his posture stiff. Lydia's reaction was instant. Her shoulders tensed, and her eyes filled with something between fear and unease. "Good morning," the man said quietly. Lydia didn't respond. Hale stepped forward. "Can I help you?" The man adjusted his glasses. "I'm here to drop off payment for a special order. Mark was handling it before his death." "What's your name?" Hale asked. "Calvin Reed." Hale had not heard that name yet. He examined the man closely. Calvin's hands were shaking slightly, though he tried to hide it. Hale noted the dirt under his nails, the small cut near the knuckle, the faint smell of smoke on his coat. Every detail added a piece to the puzzle. "Do you come here often?" Hale asked. "Once a week," Calvin replied. "Mark knew the kind of books I liked." "What kind?" Calvin paused. "Rare ones. Old letters. First editions. Books that most people overlook." Hale's mind clicked. The book he found in the storage room. The rare edition. The torn fabric. Lydia's fear when Calvin walked in. Calvin watched Hale's expression closely, as if trying to guess what he was thinking. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "Not at all," Hale said, though his voice carried a subtle sharpness. "But I do have a question. Were you here the night Mark died?" Calvin's throat bobbed. "No. I left town that evening." "Where did you go?" "A friend's place on the outskirts. I don't remember exactly what time." Lydia finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Calvin hasn't been around for days." Calvin turned toward her sharply. "I told you I had to travel." "You never told Mark that," she interrupted. Hale observed the tension between them. Calvin's jaw tightened. Lydia stepped back as he took a step forward. Hale raised a hand. "That's close enough." Calvin froze. Hale's instincts were rarely wrong, and right now, everything in his gut told him this man was involved. Maybe not entirely, maybe not directly, but involved. Calvin placed the brown envelope on the counter slowly. "I don't want any trouble." "Then stay right there," Hale said. But Calvin didn't listen. He bolted for the door. Hale reacted instantly, sprinting after him. The customers gasped as Calvin shoved past them and burst onto the street. Hale chased him down the sidewalk, dodging pedestrians, refusing to lose sight of him. Calvin was fast, but desperation fueled him, and desperation always left mistakes in its wake. He turned a corner, slipping on the damp pavement. Hale lunged forward and grabbed the back of his coat, dragging him down. They fell hard, But Hale recovered first, pinning Calvin's arms. "Why did you run?" Hale demanded. "I panicked." Calvin gasped. "I didn't kill Mark." "Then why run?" Calvin looked away, breathing heavily. "Because someone has been following me." Hale froze. "Following you," he repeated slowly. Calvin nodded. "For weeks. Watching me. Watching the store too. I thought maybe you were connected to them. I didn't know what to do." Hale tightened his grip. "Who is following you?" "I don't know," Calvin whispered. "A shadow. A figure. I've seen them in the alleys at night. I thought Mark saw them too." "Why didn't you report it?" "Because the figure, they knew where I lived. They left notes under my door. Messages written in old book pages." Hale felt a chill run through him again. Old book pages. Rare books. Someone stalking both Mark and Calvin. Someone obsessed. "Show me the notes," Hale said. Calvin swallowed. "I will. Just don't arrest me. I swear I didn't kill him." Hale hesitated. Calvin might be telling the truth. And whoever was behind this had now expanded beyond Mark's murder. A deeper plot was starting to surface, one involving obsession, surveillance, and fear. Hale pulled Calvin up and walked him back to the store. Lydia was waiting anxiously at the door. Hale glanced around, scanning every shadow, every alleyway across the street. For the first time since the case began, he felt something watching him too. And he knew the killer wasn't done yet. Detective Hale stood at the doorway of the bookstore with a sinking feeling in his stomach. Everything had escalated too quickly. Calvin Reed's claim that someone had been leaving him notes made from torn book pages had twisted the case into something darker than Hale expected. What began as a simple murder investigation had become a maze of shadows and secrets, with every turn uncovering something more unsettling. Hale knew one thing for certain now. Whoever killed Mark had been watching the bookstore for far longer than anyone realized. Inside the store, Lydia waited behind the counter, her hands clasped tightly as she tried to look brave. She had witnessed Calvin's panicked escape and Hale's chase. The air around her felt charged with fear and confusion. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as though the very shelves around her might be listening. Calvin stood near the doorway under Hale's watchful gaze. His coat was dusty from the fall, and his glasses sat crooked on his face. He kept rubbing his hands together, not from the cold but from nerves. Hale noticed how his eyes darted repeatedly to the back of the store, to the poetry section where Mark's life had ended. It was as though he expected someone to step out from behind the shelves at any moment. "Calvin," Hale said slowly, "I need you to show me those notes. Every single one." Calvin swallowed hard and nodded. "They're at my apartment. But I don't want to go alone." "You won't," Hale said. "We go together." Lydia stepped forward, her voice unsteady. "Detective, should I close the store? I don't feel safe here." Hale studied her for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally. "Lock up. Stay somewhere crowded until I call you." She nodded gratefully and reached for the keys. Hale guided Calvin outside while Lydia began securing the windows and flipping off lights. The street was busy, but somehow it felt empty. Hale kept scanning every rooftop, every parked car, every alleyway. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them even now. Calvin led him toward a small apartment complex on the edge of Whitfield. The walk was mostly silent except for the sound of their footsteps echoing off the quiet sidewalks. Houses stood still around them, lights flickering behind drawn curtains. Hale watched the shadows, always alert. Calvin lived on the second floor. As they climbed the creaky stairs, Hale noticed a faint scraping sound nearby. He paused, listening. It came from one of the storage units under the building. A slow dragging sound. Then silence. He made a mental note but kept moving. Inside Calvin's apartment, the air smelled like old coffee and stacks of paper. Books were piled everywhere, in corners, on chairs, against walls. Some were opened, some bookmarked, some lying face down as if Calvin had been reading several of them at once. His obsession with rare books was clear. But what Hale focused on was the cluttered table beside the small sofa. On it lay dozens of torn book pages, each with short handwritten messages scrawled across them in black ink. Calvin motioned toward them. "This is what I've been getting for weeks." Hale picked up the first page carefully. The words were written in neat, controlled handwriting. The message read, "I see what you take." The next page read, "You cannot own what belongs to Emmy." And another, "The store knows you. I know you better." Hale felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. Whoever wrote these messages wasn't just threatening Calvin. They were possessive, territorial, and they had an obsession not just with Calvin, but with the bookstore itself. "Calvin," Hale said, "why would someone follow you? What did you take?" Calvin's face tightened with fear. "It wasn't stealing. Mark knew. We worked together. We found something in an old shipment of donated books a few months ago. Something rare. Something strange." "What was it?" Hale asked. "A journal," Calvin whispered. "A handwritten journal from nearly 50 years ago. It was hidden behind the lining of a damaged book. We didn't know who it belonged to, but it was filled with disturbing things." Hale leaned forward. "Show me." Calvin crossed the room and opened a locked drawer. Inside was a small leather-bound journal, worn and cracked with age. Hale took it gently, noticing the faded initials on the cover, E.R. He opened the journal and began reading. The entries were written in the same careful handwriting as the messages left for Calvin. The writer spoke in obsessive detail about watching people in the bookstore. Not this modern bookstore. It must have been the original shop that stood on this land before Whitfield rebuilt it. The writer described following customers home, studying the employees, and hiding between shelves to listen to private conversations. The entries grew more disturbing, mentioning necessary removals, quiet punishments, and preserving the purity of the store. Hale's chest tightened. The author described the deeds as though the bookstore itself commanded them. A guardian, a servant of the shelves, a keeper of secrets. Calvin watched Hale's expression twist with each page he turned. "We didn't know who E.R. was," Calvin said quietly. "But Mark thought the journal belonged to the previous owner of the land, maybe someone connected to the store's history. He wanted to research it before telling the police." "You should have come forward sooner," Hale said. "We were scared," Calvin admitted. "And curious. The entries talked about hidden spaces in the store, about secret places behind the walls. Mark thought it was just fiction. I thought it was dangerous." Hale closed the journal, his mind racing. "And someone else knew you had this?" "Yes," Calvin whispered. "Someone who believed the journal was never meant to be found." Before Hale could speak again, a sudden loud crash echoed from the hallway outside the apartment. Both men froze. Hale moved toward the window, peeking out. He saw nothing. Another crash came, this time closer, like someone kicking a door. "Stay here," Hale ordered. He stepped into the hallway slowly, his hand hovering near his holster. The dim hallway felt unnaturally quiet. Then he saw it. One of the storage unit doors beneath the stairs had been forced open. The metal hung off its hinges. Someone was inside. Hale moved down the stairs with controlled steps. The air felt thick, heavy with tension. When he reached the broken door, he paused. The interior was dark. He heard slow breathing. "Come out," Hale said firmly. "Silence. Come out now." A figure stepped into the faint light. Hale tensed. It was a man, tall, thin, with messy hair and clothes coated in dust. His eyes were wild, unfocused, as though he hadn't slept in days. He clutched a torn page in one hand. The handwriting on it matched the journal. Hale's voice dropped. "Who are you?" The man smiled weakly, a twisted, haunting expression. "I am the keeper. The shelves speak to me." Hale felt his pulse spike. "E.R." "Yes," the man breathed, leaning forward. "Edward Raines. The true guardian of the bookstore. It was mine. It has always been mine." Hale's mind raced. Edward Raines. The original owner. He wasn't dead. He had been hiding in the shadows for decades. "Did you kill Mark?" Hale asked quietly. Edward's smile widened. "He touched what was mine. He read my thoughts. He wanted to expose me. But the store told me to silence him." "And Calvin?" Hale asked. "You followed him too." "He tried to take my journal," Edward hissed. "He tried to steal my voice." Hale stepped forward slowly, trying not to provoke him. "You can let go now. The store doesn't control you. You've been alone too long." Edward's breathing quickened. No, you don't understand. The store needs a guardian. It always needs one. When I am gone, someone else must continue." Maybe you. He lunged. Hale reacted instantly, grabbing Edward's wrist as the torn page fluttered to the ground. They struggled in the small space, their bodies slamming against the metal shelves. Edward fought with surprising strength fueled by obsession and madness. But Hale managed to pin him down, pressing his weight against the man who had haunted the bookstore for decades. Edward screamed about the shelves, about secrets, about guardianship, until his voice cracked and his strength faded. Calvin appeared at the top of the stairs, trembling as he watched Hale secure Edward. "It's over," Hale said, breathing heavily. "It's finally over." Hours later, the police swarmed the apartment building, taking Edward Raines into custody. They found more torn pages in his makeshift hiding spots and old maps of the bookstore with markings that matched the journal's descriptions. He had been hiding between the cracks of Whitfield for years, slipping in and out of the store through a forgotten basement entrance that had been sealed long ago but never truly closed. When Hale returned to the bookstore with Lydia the next day, the air felt different, lighter, as though the walls themselves were relieved. Lydia looked around with quiet sadness, placing her hand on the counter where Mark once stood. "Thank you," she whispered to Hale, "for finding the truth." Hale nodded. "The store is safe now. And so are you." She smiled faintly, though her eyes carried the weight of loss. Hale stepped outside into the cold morning air. The bookstore behind him stood silent, no longer hiding anything between its shelves. For the first time since the case began, Hale felt a sense of closure. The final page had been turned, and the shadows that once haunted Whitfield had finally been brought into the light.